Stand up.
All right, everybody. I tried some music. I tried some cool effects, and now I've got Chris Mathias joining me for the first time to talk about his new book, To Catch a Fascist. So good, so important. Go order the book right now. Go get it, and you can't put it down. It is so timely and important, and I'm really happy to meet you. You done great work here, not only with this book, but as a journalist for a long time. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's great to be here. What a great intro. Thanks for having me, Pete.
Yeah. The blurbs are great. Everybody's loving it. It's important work you're doing. Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Your background as a journalist first before we really get into the book. You've been covering like the far right for a long time, which is fucking crazy waters to swim in. Like, where did you grow up? Why did you decide to do this?
Oh, yeah. So interestingly enough, I grew up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which is the site of the deadliest battle of the Civil War, turning point where the Union really turned things around. I think I didn't realize it until later, but I think partially why I got onto this beat was maybe where I grew up. There's basically monuments all over that battlefield. A lot of them Confederate, a lot of them, I think, arguably, kind of lost cause propaganda. So I think I've always been fascinated with this Civil War that we kind of never stopped fighting. Also, because of kind of the historical significance of Gettysburg, not only for the battle, but for the Gettysburg Address, it's been a magnet for extremist groups. And like growing up, there were Klan rallies in Gettysburg and so on and so forth. But, eventually I also, funnily enough, I worked at I haven't told this story yet, actually. Wow. One summer in Gettysburg in college, I worked at a Civil War gun shop where we sold active Civil War black powder weapons.
Oh, way.
Yeah, and in Pennsylvania, you don't need a permit. You don't need a permit for it. You just have to be 18 years old. It'd be hard to rob a bank with one of those weapons, but but my coworker was a Confederate reenactor who turned up to work every day in a full Confederate uniform. I was like 19 years old, smoking a lot of weed, like did not really, process what he was all about. But I think he took a shine to me. And by the end of the summer, he lifted up his sleeve and he had a Third Reich tattoo on his arm. He could tell that my eyes widened, and he like put his sleeve down and was like, I don't believe that anymore. But I think he was like trying to see how I reacted. At any rate,
that's crazy.
It's nuts, man. Yeah. And then, so like 10 years.
Have you written about working at that gun shop and growing up there and that guy? And
I really thanks for asking that. I really want to write about growing up in Gettysburg at some point. Haven't quite found my avenue. But I am excited. I'm trying to do a reading back there, which I think will be.
Oh, great. Well, yeah, I hope the book gets a lot of attention, and I hope you get to do readings all over the place, because it really is so important. Your journalism is important, but this book and the way you did it is, I hope it wins awards. I hope it gets a tremendous amount of attention, because you really help teach us. You're also like a historian. I mean, I think it's fair to say you are a historian of certainly American fascism and right-wing extremism, and there's a lot in that. You also got close with a lot of extremists and actual, quote, members of Antifa. So let's just talk a little bit about how you went about putting this book together, and what you did for it, because it's some real kind of dangerous journalism, To Catch a Fascist, the fight to expose the radical right. It is so good. And I'm ashamed I haven't had you on before, but I'm so excited to talk to you about this book. How did you go about doing it?
Oh, thanks so much, Pete. That's so nice. Yeah, so my journey for this book kind of started in Charlottesville at the Unite the Right rally in 2017, largest white supremacist gathering in a generation. Nazi drives his car into a crowd of counter protesters, kills Heather Heyer. Afterwards, Trump says, calls the Nazis very fine people. I think Charlottesville kind of shocked the country. It showed this kind of insurgent fascist movement in America on the march in the 21st century. And so it kind of became my task to unmask this movement, right? To figure out who was in this movement and how they were influencing people in power in the Republican Party. But I very quickly learned that there were already people doing that kind of research with great success, and those people were anti-fascist activists. They were Antifa. And as for how I reported the book, what I learned pretty quickly is that Antifa had unmasked or doxed thousands of new American Nazis. Basically doing kind of investigations using spies to go undercover into fascist groups to collect intelligence that they would then use to unmask them, to dox them. And when I say dox, I don't mean post their phone number and address to for people to call and threaten them. I mean like the digital equivalent of ripping the white hood off of a Klansman.
Right.
And so when I started writing this book, I made a spreadsheet, one of the most tedious things I've ever done, of about 1,000 doxes, and that anti-fascists published over the last 10 years. And, I basically said, what group the Nazi belonged to, what anti-fascist group doxed them, what occupation the Nazi was, whether they were fired, so on and so forth, whether they were at Charlottesville, whether or not they were at January 6th. And, basically searched for the most compelling stories and tried to find patterns. Eventually, I landed on kind of the main story of the book. After I talked to about 60 anti-fascist activists for this book, and many of them, when I asked for the most compelling story, mentioned this anti-fascist spy in Washington State who went by the name Vincent and went undercover into a Nazi group called Patriot Front. And so that's how I kind of got my start.
So just to be clear, there are activists that are going undercover in groups that they do not share views with, and they're doing that for several different reasons. But we're not talking about government police or detectives or paid people. We're talking about people that would, I guess, be risking their lives to be undercover, to have a different identity and infiltrate extremist groups.
Yeah.
That is a regular tactic of different activists who identify as Antifa.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I think, the kind of in the public imagination, the spies that go undercover, the infiltrators that go undercover into white supremacist groups, most famously the Klan. We have movies like Black Klansman and Imperium and The Order and so on and so forth. The spies depicted in those movies are law enforcement. And there's a lot of other examples of that throughout history. But what I found so fascinating about the spies, and by the way, the feds still have people undercover in these groups, but in my kind of opinion, I think it's over the last 10 years, this kind of modern iteration of Antifa has kind of done more work to infiltrate the far right than I would argue maybe law enforcement, maybe academic think tanks or media outlets or whatever. They did this and put themselves at risk, because that's kind of ideologically where they're at. They're anarchists and socialists and communists. They're distrusting of the government. And secondly, I think a lot of them had brushes with law enforcement that were not great. And mostly, though, they had brushes with fascists in their communities and quickly had the realization that law enforcement, the local government wasn't going to do enough to protect them from this.
Right.
So there's kind of this guiding philosophy of this axiom of we protect us in a lot of parts of the left, and especially in anti-fascist circles. And I think that's what, compelled a lot of these spies to take on some big risks.
How many people have actually like taken this on? Who is Antifa, and how did you get credibility for them to trust you as a journalist?
Sure. So it's really hard to make numbers for Antifa, but the way I kind of define Antifa in the book, so Antifa is just a shortening of anti-fascist, but I would argue that the word itself, which most Americans didn't know until 2017, refers to a pretty specific kind of militant tradition of fucking up the far right in America. And it has its origins in the 80s and 90s in the punk scene. So there was groups like, incidentally in Minneapolis, where this all got started, there's a group called the Baldies, which was this like multiracial young crew of punks that basically was tired of seeing Nazis at their shows and hurting people in their community. So they kind of banded together and started punching Nazis in the streets. They eventually, though, grow more sophisticated politically. They start pressuring venues not to host these bands. And they start identifying as anarchists and socialists and communists. And by the 90s, they have a group called Anti-Racist Action, which is this kind of anti-racist skinhead movement that is fucking up Nazis across America and basically kicks a generation of Nazis off the streets. So by the time Trump comes to power in 2015, 2016, a lot of activists kind of find this blueprint left behind by Anti-Racist Action, which by this point wasn't as relevant anymore. And they kind of use that model of, a few basic tenets, which is that fascists need to be confronted in the streets, sometimes violently. Fascists should have no platform to speak or organize. So that means like not letting them hold rallies, trying to get their permits for votes, chasing them off the streets. In the modern era, it means deplatforming them on social media. And then finally, what we've already discussed is that the state and law enforcement can't be trusted in this fight. So as for like numbers, I think Mark Bray once, who wrote kind of the last book about Antifa, put it at about 200 groups. But I think what I would say is that these kind of anti-fascist formations form very organically and kind of rise and fall very quickly. Sometimes they announce themselves, sometimes they don't. I think wherever you are in America, you are not that far from an anti-fascist formation, but it might be a handful of people, 2 or 3 people.
What have you seen in covering anti-fascists who identify sometimes often as Antifa, but it's very nebulous, isn't it fair to say? And there's not like a some kind of sworn testimony or password necessarily.
Yeah.
Not very well organized in many ways, often leaderless and so on. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, do you think that, I mean, what has been the relationship and what has been the view, generally speaking, of violence for anti-fascists in America?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I asked it for a reason. Like, everybody knows that is being honest and having a good faith argument that the domestic terrorist threat, the terrorist threat to America, has always been, even before 9/11, has always been right wing, anti government extremists. You can call them white nationalists, white supremacists, anti government, far right extremists. They've always been the ones threatening us. Timothy McVeigh and so many famous ones.
Yeah.
And so they have continued to be a threat, and a violent threat, and committed all types of violence. And you see Republicans and this administration, this regime, obviously always trying to say Antifa is the most violent threat, and they have a history of violence, for which they don't. So I'm answering the question that way myself. But you're the journalist covering them. What is their relationship and view of violence? What is their history of violence?
Yeah. So to touch on your first point very quickly about it being kind of a nebulous term, sometimes the way I think about it is that famous Supreme Court ruling, which is about porn. Like you just know it when you see it. I think there's kind of a similar way with Antifa. Like you kind of just know it when you see it. But as for its relationship with violence, um, yeah, I mean, so I think in the public imagination, most of the people still associate Antifa with punching Nazis, and for a good reason. I think in 2017, no one really knew what Antifa was, and then there was, in quick succession, all these viral videos of kind of activists in all black punching Nazis. Most famously, Richard Spencer getting punched on Inauguration Day in 2017.
That's right.
Yeah. And the thing is like Antifa makes no apologies for being militant. They think sometimes you have to be militant. If the analogy I draw in the book is if a Nazi walks into a bar and starts throwing up Nazi salutes, starts screaming racial slurs, everyone, I would like to think most Americans would ask that person to leave, and then if they refuse to leave, force him to leave, physically. And I think that's a fine and good thing. And the reason for that is because that Nazi poses an urgent, inherent threat. They want to hurt your neighbors, and that is kind of the guiding philosophy of Antifa when they march on the streets. And but I will say, compared to the violence of the far right, it just is so tiny. Like the amount of violence, mostly, it really is rare, and it involves kind of battles on the streets with Nazis holding rallies. There have been some other incidents, the one murder kind of tied to Antifa over the last decade or two occurred in Portland in 2020, where there was um, a confrontation between an anti-fascist and a kind of a Proud Boy, and Michael Renault ended up opening fire. He argued it was in self-defense. He's eventually, a few days later, killed by federal agents, which you could argue was kind of an extrajudicial, execution. But and then, there's a couple other incidents that a lot of people on the right will try to cite, one of which was an anti-fascist in Washington State who firebombed some ICE trucks in Tacoma, Washington years ago. He identified as an anti-fascist. I think anti-fascists would argue that he wasn't trying to hurt anybody. He was just trying to blow up some vehicles. But, a lot of these things are open for debate. But what I will say is that, yes, Antifa is militant. Most of the time, it just means getting in fights on the streets. And it just pales in comparison to the violence of the far right, which has killed hundreds over the last couple of decades.
Well, how do you think, what is the contrast then with how Antifa is portrayed in the media and kind of the mainstream media and what they're actually doing, what they believe in, what they've been up to?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think because Nazi punching is so viral and obviously you're going to click on it and you're going to watch it. It's kind of obscured the bulk of the work Antifa actually does. And that work is mostly just research and intelligence gathering. And, so much of anti-fascist work actually ends up just being behind a computer. And, doing kind of remarkable, I would argue, journalism or open source investigations where the Nazi, the spy I told you about at the beginning of this episode, the one that goes undercover into Patriot Front, this Nazi group, what comes of that infiltration is he gets a hold of 440 gigabytes worth of Patriot Front's internal messages that they send to each other, including photos and videos and audio of their meetings and stuff. This all ends up in a public database on a site called Unicorn Riot, which is an independent media site, does really great work. So, this kind of open source material that anyone can go through to figure out who in their communities might be a Nazi. Anti-fascist researchers from across the country pour through these messages, thousands of them, to look for little morsels, little clues that Nazis leave behind about their real identities. Maybe they mention what they do for a living, maybe they mention where they live. Well, one of my most favorite details is that I found in my spreadsheet that anti-fascists identified or doxed, unmasked 6 Nazis because those Nazis posted photos of their dogs online, and they were able to match those dogs to like pictures on social media accounts and so on and so forth. But so just kind of like remarkable in investigations. And the reason they do this, kind of the tactical or strategic reason, is to create a social cost for being a fascist. It leverages a taboo against being an explicit white supremacist or an explicit Nazi to create consequences. It says, yeah, sure, you can join that Nazi group, but if you join it, we're going to find out. We're going to name and shame you. We're going to tell your employer. We're going to tell your family. Your girlfriend's going to dump you. You might get kicked out of your apartment. And what that does is it kind of maintains that social taboo, and also would dissuade other people from joining organized fascism. And there are a bunch of remarkable stories of this in the book. Really quick, Identity Europa, white supremacist group that was in Charlottesville, also had an anti-fascist spy in them. Collects all their messages. Researchers get to work. Eventually, 100 members are identified of Identity Europa, unmasked. And Identity Europa ends up having to disband. They just can't organize anymore. Yeah.
I mean, the theory, obviously, the exercise or the strategy rather is to unmask, to shame, to say, listen, if this is what you believe, then like anybody else, if these are your principles, then be honest, be open about it. Why not? And the question, now is, well, if they're unmasked, if they're named, if they're outed, and their employer finds out that they have been running around chanting and saying and writing all these things and making threats often, then maybe they'll lose their job, or maybe they, as you mentioned, it'll destroy their relationship. This is the technique. This is the strategy that anti-fascists have been using for years. And you have some examples of where it's worked in America's racist past. But also the question now becomes, does it still work, or is it virtuous to be a Nazi, to be a right-wing white supremacist? Is it a good thing now that they are running the federal government and I think using white nationalist propaganda to recruit people to ICE and so on? So where has it worked in the past, and what if it stops working, that strategy?
Yeah. Well, to your first question about where it's worked in the past, one of my favorite stories that I learned about was the Ku Klux Klan in Buffalo, New York in the 1920s. We kind of forget that there were 2 iterations of the Klan. The first was right after the Civil War, and then the second was in kind of like the mid, like 1915 to 1925. The second Klan, however, is like fucking massive, millions of members. It's kind of like a multi-level marketing scheme, and like, but it plays on not only anti-Black bigotry and anti-Semitism, but also kind of a burgeoning anti-Catholicism, because the wave of immigrants coming from Europe now are predominantly Catholic. So the Klan is mostly kind of this Protestant formation. But in Buffalo, New York, the mayor is Catholic. They have a giant Klan chapter there. He hates the Klan. He kind of starts working with local Black churches, with Jewish groups, and he eventually enlists a spy to go undercover into the Klan. That spy eventually one night, the secret headquarters of the Klan is broken into and ransacked, and a very important document disappears. That document ends up in the hands of the mayor, who, after some deft denials of any involvement in this burglary, posts the list of 18,000 members of the Klan in Buffalo downtown for anyone to see. So what ends up happening is half of fucking Buffalo comes out to come see who among their neighbors is in the Ku Klux Klan, who's burning crosses at night. There's lines around the block. Eventually, they have to start posting lists at other locations to deal with the crowd. And what ends up happening very quickly is that Klan-owned businesses are boycotted and vandalized. A lot of Klansmen turn up to work and get fired. A lot of Klansmen are exposed as hypocrites. The Klan at this point is like very anti-vice and like against drinking and stuff. So it exposes a lot of Klansmen as hypocrites. But eventually, the Klan just can't recover from this new social arrangement where everyone knows who they are, and it eventually dies. It just is destroyed. A coda to that story is that the spy that goes undercover into the Klan gets into a shootout with a Klansman, and they both die. But to your second question,
I mean, so in the past, when it worked, and that's an amazing story about what happened in Buffalo in 1920.
Yeah,
and can't be sustained, as you said. But today, things are different. I mean, these guys are out and loud and bold, and currently they're here watching us in the chat room. I'm reading the comments from them. I don't know who knows who these people are that are just writing. Could be a 15-year-old on a YouTube account. Who knows? But I mean, like they're everywhere. I mean, they're running the federal government. Stephen Miller. I mean, what we can. So what has changed in terms of those strategies and whether or not like shaming them will work?
Yeah. So you're touching on the kind of animating question.
Worse than being, by the way, sorry, the only thing probably one of the worst, things worse than being like a fascist, having this religious extremism, a Nazi, would be to be a pedophile. Right. And so they're protecting pedophiles, and so the bar is so low in terms of shame and moral clarity in this country. So it's hard to know what could get you damaged in your reputation, which should be your currency, your credibility, at your job, much less in your community. So I just feel like so much has changed in a bad way. But I want to get your thoughts, obviously.
No, completely. I mean, so yeah, what you're touching on is kind of the animating question of my book, right? Like if doxing, unmasking leverages this societal taboo to create a cost for being a fascist, what happens when that taboo starts to disappear? So I think anti-fascists over the last 10 years, we're very good at kind of this like specific thing, like this localized effort to kick, very explicit fascists and Nazis off the street. Now, of course, we live in this kind of mask off fascist moment. My book ends with a profile of a Nazi who recently decided not to be a Nazi. He left Patriot Front. He left white nationalism behind him. And he describes to me like what a crazy feeling it is to have left a Nazi group and then to hear the same rhetoric coming out of the White House. And like how like scary that is for him. And so, I think the work has changed in a way. I recently wrote an article for The Guardian about this, which is, Antifa for the last 10 years was unmasking this new generation of fascists, of Nazis. Now, who are they unmasking? Who's wearing the mask right now? It's ICE agents. It's it's a secret police force. So you are seeing this effort now, not only by Antifa, but to a lot of people who don't use that label to identify the people abducting their neighbors. It's the same idea, right? It's basically saying like, you can't do this anonymously. You can't be a predator. Basically, predators do not get to enjoy anonymity. That's what an anti-fascist told me about the effort to identify ICE. Like there has to be accountability. And it's the same kind of thing. It's basically saying like, yeah, you can join ICE, you can get that bonus. But if you do that, you're going to have this shame on you for the rest of your life that you will never be able to wash away. Like you are basically, it's an effort to say that, to tell ICE agents that you are the Nazis in this movie, that in a generation you will be depicted as the villains in the movies your kids watch. So it's like best to get out now. And I think we are seeing a change in public opinion. After the amazing uprisings in Minneapolis, which make me want to cry, and also the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, you've seen the polls, the approval ratings for ICE just absolutely crater. And you're also seeing record level support for slogans like abolish ICE, even among Republicans. There's 20% support for the phrase abolish ICE among Republicans. So anti-fascists are basically, I think, trying to claw back that taboo against explicit white supremacy. And right now, that work is unmasking what is essentially, I would argue, Trump's secret police force.
What do you make? How do you interpret, or what do you make of the argument that people say that we just need to lower the rhetoric, stop calling them Nazis, stop calling them using words like Gestapo and all these other things, because that's what really upsets them, including some of the people apparently watching this right now. Also, they're saying that Antifa are the fascists. So we could, try to define fascism for people, and you can either, agree or disagree with it or support it or not. But there are some pretty clear definitions, and political scientists have been studying this for years. Where is it on the ideological spectrum from left to right, and where has it been practiced in the past, and where is it being practiced now? And it's different in different places. And obviously in America in 2026, our fascism is different than it was in Germany. And all those caveats are important, but still we have to have a thoughtful conversation about some of these terms. What do you make of the argument and that we need to lower the rhetoric and we need to stop calling them Nazis and using this terminology?
Yeah, so I kind of have I understand that impulse, like you don't want to use the scariest words in our language, like lest you diminish them, diminish their importance, to diminish their severity. But like we also have those words to prevent precisely what's happening right now. Like you can't have a secret police force abducting people based on the color of their skin and demanding their papers, and then be like, "Don't call us fascists." Like, I'm sorry. And there's other examples of this too. I think like the ICE detention centers. There's a debate. Jake Tapper last week kind of chastised an activist for calling those detention centers concentration camps. I think there's an argument for calling them concentration camps, and I think a lot of good historians and experts about concentration camps say we should call them concentration camps. I don't know how you could look at the kind of aerial footage last week of the immigrants in that detention center, all in the same uniforms, protesting the squalid conditions they were being kept in, including children, and not, be reminded of some of the worst photos in world history. And I think that also comes with the F word, with fascism. It's been kind of something. My relationship to the word fascism has changed a lot since writing this book. I think there's a mythology we tell ourselves in America that pretty simple story, which is that we were the good guys in World War II. We defeated fascism, when in fact, historians will point to the fact that for example, the Nazis looked to the Jim Crow South for inspiration for their own race laws. Langston Hughes in the 1930s, speaking at the World Congress of Writers in Paris, says, "You do not need to tell like the black man in America what fascism is. We've been living under fascism." Robert Paxton, kind of the foremost scholar of fascism in America, writes a book called The Anatomy of Fascism. It's a giant book that basically the climax of the book is defining fascism. He says that the Ku Klux Klan is the proto-fascist kind of formation. Like it, even exists before the word fascism exists itself. And this is all to say that like it's much more complicated than the story we've been told. Also, that the U.S. Army, yes, fought Nazis, fought fascists, but it was also a colonial army. It was also a segregated army. It was an army where black soldiers fought in segregated units and then returned to America to live under Jim Crow, a system of apartheid. So we've always had fascism in America. What we're seeing now is an intensification of these underlying social arrangements. It's an attempt to kind of reify hierarchies, to make them permanent. and to destroy any semblance of actual democracy. And I think what's happening right now is an absolute 5 alarm fire. It's an emergency, and that's why I think it's important to use the word fascism. Robert Paxton, by the way, initially declined to call Trump a fascist in 2016, the historian, but he revised that after January 6th and said, yes, Trump is a fascist.
Yes, because he lied about the election, and then he led and fueled an insurrection. Also, again, just to remind everybody, there is a word that is worse to be called, and it's very dangerous to be called. And I have a lot of feelings around it, because being called a pedophile is terrible, and not because it hurts my feelings, because I've been called a pedophile a million times, because I'm an advocate for LGBT youth, in this case, in my town. And that's true of anybody who's an advocate for LGBT community. You're called a pedophile, and we were called pedophiles over and over. And if I believed that my neighbor was actually sexually assaulting kids, I would do something about it. And that's different than if I believe my neighbor and know that my neighbor is a right-wing extremist. He's actively doing all kinds of things that I disagree with and find vehemently horrible, but I'm not going to, call the police on him because I don't know that he's assaulting a kid. Like, it's so this idea that they get worked up about the words. I just have to remind them all that they have been calling Joe Biden and any Democrat and anybody who supports the LGBT community pedophiles, which is the worst thing you can call someone. It puts people in danger if you actually believed it. And then, of course, the irony of them all protecting a guy who is clearly he's protecting pedophiles, if not one himself.
Yes, and you're already seeing like kind of the biggest voices on the right, including Nick Fuentes, an outright white supremacist. I think this week said that Epstein was awesome, that he seemed like a cool guy, and like you're basically starting to see the right realize that they have to do something else here, because they're just way too implicated in the Epstein stuff. And the groomer shit, the groomer pedophile stuff around trans rights was just one of the most disgusting campaigns I've ever witnessed.
I dealt with it in my local community, and listeners and anybody who's ever heard me knows I bring it up all the time. It's so important. We had Charlie Kirk's group Turning Point in my community at the school board meetings, calling board members who were also teachers, 20-year veteran teachers, calling them groomers and pedophiles. They work with kids every day. They'd never been accused of anything in any way inappropriate. And then there was the public using this kind of rhetoric, and the danger that it creates is unparalleled, in my opinion. And I saw the ugliest part of it. Many of us have. You certainly have. And to gather all the information for this book, to catch a fascist, the fight to expose the radical right. Before I let you go, you mentioned what happened in Minneapolis. I mean, it's an interesting time for your book to come out. It just has come out. It's available for everybody to buy. And it's kind of like what you've been covering as a journalist has become a lot more public. These people, and I think a lot of it is in many ways organic. When you see the federal police in your town, in your city, assaulting your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, your family, a lot of people stand up and do something about it. And that is the history of anti-fascism, of course. And we're seeing it in Minneapolis. So I just want to get your reaction to this moment that we're in, and worth mentioning that they have drawn down. They have announced they are drawing down. Tom Homan said it again and again. And at least for the moment, the people of Minneapolis were all anti-fascists, at least most of them. And I would say they won. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what's happening in Minneapolis.
I just gotta say this: the chat's going crazy, and I normally try not to engage them, but I just do have to say, and you would actually know the answer to this. You have to be the dumbest person in the world to think that protesters are being paid. That any of us that have gone to a No Kings rally or a protest, or Renee Good or Alex Prey or anybody who names, that they're getting paid. And the reason you have to be an idiot is because there's not any evidence of it. If that were the case, there would be all kinds of evidence of it. And it's just a stupid, you're a very, very, very dumb person if you think that protesters are doing it for money, that they're getting paid. So do you have any evidence that anyone has been paid for the protests that they've attended, or any of the
no, definitely not. I mean,
your work that they're doing in Minneapolis to protect people?
Yeah, no, there's no one's getting paid. I often joke, I've, you know, been accused of being funded by George Soros or whatever. It's like I would love a George Soros paycheck, but I do not get one. Um, that thing, like that idea of the paid protester, is part of this long trope in American history called the outside agitator trope. It's basically this way of depicting every uprising, every protest as somehow inorganic, and astroturfed, committed by kind of saboteurs that aren't like reflective of the community. And what that does is to undermine the grievance at the heart of the protests. We heard about this constantly in 2020. You know, there's constantly rumors of Antifa provocateurs starting the uprisings, and it was this way of distracting and deflecting from what were organic Black-led uprisings. Um, and
And there's plenty of evidence of the opposite, by the way. I covered for CNN and SiriusXM the Tea Party movement in 2010. That was absolutely funded by
far-right billionaires.
Billionaires. For sure. All those Tea Party, they weren't shy about it. They were open about it. They had fucking trucks and signs. And guess what else is funded? The Moms for Liberty movement. Turning Point USA has tons of money. Charlie Kirk's outfit funded protesters and organizations all over the country. And by the way, so do all kinds of progressive groups that we do fund, we do organize all the time, openly and about it. But this idea that people are like going to protest, or those that are volunteering to protect marginalized communities in Minneapolis, they're fucking good people helping their neighbors. They're just good human beings.
Yes, I think this so much of right-wing conspiracy theories about the left are just giant projection. They basically they have to make these conspiracy theories about the left because they can't fathom a movement unlike their own, a movement that isn't strictly hierarchical, that isn't funded by billionaires, that isn't full of grifters. And so they try to put that on the left. But the fact is, when you look at what's happening in Minneapolis, when you looked at what happened in Minneapolis again in 2020 after George Floyd, when you looked at what happened in Minneapolis in the 1980s and 1990s with the beginning of anti-racist action, these were all organic uprisings. They were a response to material conditions. They were a response to the fact that the realization of We Protect Us, that our neighbors are getting harmed or are at risk, and our law enforcement isn't going to help us, and our Democratic Party isn't going to help us. So we have to turn up ourselves. We have to show up for our neighbor. I think what I have found so kind of heartening and inspiring about Minneapolis is the degree to which it's a lot of anti-fascist tactics by another name. It's kind of these tactics going, being adopted at a bigger scale. There's so many parallels between what people in Minneapolis are doing and what kind of Antifa activists were doing in 2017 when this new generation of Nazis was taking to the street. And those things included, confronting Nazis in the street. Minneapolis is confronting ICE in the street, monitoring Nazis. Minneapolis is monitoring ICE. Minneapolis is identifying ICE agents. Minneapolis is, pressuring venues and hotels not to host ICE, to do business with ICE. They are trying to create a social cost for ICE in the city of Minneapolis, and I think it's working. That's why we are seeing this kind of drawdown. It's why you've seen Trump kind of retreat for the first time, and I can remember how long. They know that they have run up against a resistance that won't back down, and that can beat them.
It's such a good book. It's great journalism and great work and courageous in this time. I really appreciate you joining me. I want to keep talking to you as you cover this and talk to you again when you're done with your first round of book interviews. Chris, congratulations. And I hope everybody goes and buys it right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pete. This was a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go see if any of the people that are saying nasty, stupid things will join me live. I do this sometimes.
Oh, okay. Great.
I don't want you to have any part in that. I don't want you to.
Okay. So all right, well, I'll take off.
You can punch out and I'll stay. All right.
Thanks, take care.
Go get the book, everybody. To Catch a Fascist, The Fight to Expose the Radical Right. Really good stuff.
All right. Take care. Thanks, guys.
Bye, Chris. Yep. All right. And now I'm going to throw the link if anybody wants to actually back up what they're saying by putting their face on the screen. So I put the link in the chat. So there's over 200 people here and a lot of trolls and people saying all kinds of nonsense. And I like good faith conversation. So if you want to say it, to my face, rather than just being someone who's an anonymous person typing, I'm not going to be pejorative to anybody. I don't want to get scolded again by my friends who say that's beneath me. It's not. But if anybody wants to join me and make an argument, then you can join me right now. I'll put you right on the screen. Or you can just keep typing stuff, which I think is, I'm never impressed with it. It's the height of cowardice and weakness. If you really want, I've always taken live callers throughout my career. So I'll give it another 60 seconds. If anybody wants to, I'll put the link in there one more time. The link is in the chat. You can just click on that and I'll bring you up. You just have to come. You don't even have to give me your real name. Just come on with your face and say to my face what you're saying in the chat. Nobody ever does it. Nobody's ever taken me up on it. I will give you credit if you do. You'll be the first. Granted, I've only started doing these live hits here on YouTube and elsewhere for, I don't know, a couple months. But obviously, I've been engaging callers and anonymous people on social media and on live radio for almost 15 years. But yeah, I guess nobody's going to join me. All right, going once. Final opportunity to chime in and say to my face what you're saying in the chat. People don't want to do that. It's scary. Oh, I'm scared. Oh, I'm Jim Gaffigan. Oh, I like bacon. I like losers and suckers. All right, thanks for watching live. Those of you who have been watching. And thank you to everybody. I can't do it without you. It's an ad-free daily show. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Join us anytime, and I will talk to you later. Have a good rest of your day.